The Carson Tech Tower loomed over downtown Seattle like a glass monolith, its reflective surface catching the pale morning light of an overcast October day. At 8:03 a.m., the lobby was already alive with the quiet urgency of corporate ambition. Elevators' hummed heels clicked across marble floors and the scent of expensive coffee lingered in the air. On the 39th floor, the executive conference suite felt like another world entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the gray expanse of Puget Sound in the distance. Inside the largest meeting room, a long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. 8 men in tailored suits sat or stood in a loose semicircle, adjusting cufflinks, checking watches, reviewing notes on tablets. They were the finalists for the position of Regional Executive Vice President, a role that came with a 7-figure compensation package, stock options, and a direct line to the board. Each of them had spent years climbing the corporate ladder. Their resumes were polished weapons, their smiles practiced. Then the door opened again. Ethan Marsh stepped inside. He was 38, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped from years of manual labor followed by years of worry. His light blue button-down shirt had faded at the collar and cuffs. The sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms, still corded from years working on factory floors. His khaki pants were clean but worn at the knees. On his feet were gray sneakers that had seen better days. In his left hand, he carried a brown paper lunch bag folded neatly at the top. His dark hair was combed but still damp from the quick shower he'd taken after dropping his daughter at school. His face, square-jawed, unshaven, held the quiet tension of a man who knew he did not belong here. He paused just inside the doorway, eyes sweeping the room. The other candidates glanced up then away again, almost immediately dismissing him as lost or misplaced maintenance staff. Ethan felt the weight of their indifference like a physical thing. He cleared his throat softly. A young woman in a charcoal blazer approached from the reception desk outside the glass walls. "Mr. Marsh?" she asked, glancing at her tablet. "Yes, ma'am. You're scheduled for 8:15. Right this way, please." She led him past the waiting men through a second set of double doors and into a smaller, more private conference room. The table here was smaller, the chairs upholstered in soft gray leather. At the far end sat a woman alone. Rachel Whitmore did not rise when Ethan entered. She was 42, though she looked younger in the unforgiving morning light. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a sleek chignon. Her navy blazer was immaculate, the single silver brooch at the lapel catching the light like a shard of ice. Her eyes, cool gray, lifted from the folder in front of her and fixed on him. "Ethan Marsh," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." He remained standing just inside the door. "Please, sit." He crossed the room, slowly set the paper bag on the edge of the table as if it might stain the wood, and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. The leather creaked under his weight. Rachel studied him for a long moment without speaking. Then she opened the folder. "I see here you applied for a warehouse associate position," she said. "Third shift, starting pay $22.50 an hour plus benefits." Ethan nodded once. "And yet," she continued, turning a page, "your name appeared on today's executive candidate list. A clerical error, apparently. Someone downstairs routed you up here instead of to HR on level 2. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "I figured as much when the elevator dinged on 39. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line, not quite a smile, not quite disapproval. Still, she said, "You're here. You walked through that door. So tell me, Mr. Marsh, why should I waste the next 15 minutes of my morning on a man who applied to lift boxes instead of Litter Region?" Ethan looked at her, really looked, not at the title, not at the office, not at the view. At her. Then he leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on the table. "I don't think you should," he said quietly. "I don't have a degree. I don't have executive experience. I spent 11 years as lead technician at a power plant up near Everett. Ran crews, fixed multi-million-dollar equipment under deadline, kept people safe when things went wrong. But that was before Rachel prompted, before my wife got sick." His voice stayed level, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. She fought for 14 months. I took a year of unpaid leave to be with her. When she passed, the plant let me go. No hard feelings, they needed someone full-time. I understood. Rachel did not interrupt. I've been piecing things together since. Odd jobs, night shifts, whatever pays the rent and keeps the lights on. I came here today because Carson Tech offers full family medical coverage after 90 days even for warehouse staff. That's what I need. Not a corner office, just a steady paycheck and insurance for my daughter. Rachel turned another page in the folder, though she already knew what was there. You have a 7-year-old. Grace, yes. And you're raising her alone. Yes. Rachel closed the folder. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC system. You realize, she said at last, that most people in your position would have tried to spin this into some kind of underdog narrative, sell themselves. Tell me how their hardship makes them uniquely qualified. Ethan gave a small, tired shrug. I don't have time for stories. Grace has a small birthday party tonight. I promised her a cake. If I'm not home by 6, she'll think I forgot. Rachel's gaze dropped to the paper bag on the table. Is that lunch for both of us, he said. Peanut butter and jelly for her. Turkey on rye for me. I pack it every morning. Something flickered across Rachel's face, too brief to name. She leaned back in her chair. You can go Mr. Marsh, she said. I'll have HR correct the scheduling error and make sure your warehouse interview happens this afternoon. Ethan stood. Thank you for your time. He turned toward the door. Mr. Marsh. He paused, hand on the handle. Rachel was looking at the paper bag again. Tell Grace. Happy birthday. Ethan nodded once, then stepped out. The door closed softly behind him. Rachel remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from her. Outside in the corridor, the other candidates were still waiting, still confident, still certain they belonged. Ethan walked past them without looking back, paper bag in hand, heading for the elevator that would take him down to where he thought he belonged. But Rachel Whitmore stayed in the conference room a long time after he left, the folder still closed on the table in front of her, wondering why the room suddenly felt colder than it had 10 minutes earlier. Ethan stepped into the elevator alone. The doors closed with a soft chime, sealing him away from the polished world of the 39th floor. He pressed the button for level 2, then leaned back against the mirrored wall, the paper bag crinkling against his hip. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, faint lines etched deeper by the last 3 years. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had once fixed machines that powered cities, now reduced to hoping for a spot on a loading dock. Down on level 2, the HR office smelled of printer ink and stale coffee. A receptionist in her 20s glanced up from her screen. Ethan Marsh warehouse interview. Yes. Take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. He sat on a plastic chair bolted to the floor, the bag on his lap like a shield. His phone buzzed once, text from Mrs. Larson, the neighbor who watched Grace after school. Grace is a little warm. Nothing bad, just asking for you. She drew a picture of you as a superhero again. Come home soon, he typed back quickly. On my way after this, tell her Daddy's bringing cake. He slipped the phone into his pocket and waited. Meanwhile, on the 39th floor, Rachel Whitmore remained in the conference room long after Ethan left. The folder lay untouched. She stared at the spot where the paper bag had rested as though it had left an imprint on the mahogany. She had interviewed hundreds of candidates over the years. They came armed with buzzwords, synergy leverage, pivot. They quoted metrics, dropped names, projected confidence like armor. Ethan Marsh had carried a lunch bag and spoken the plain truth. No polish, no performance, just facts delivered without apology. She opened the folder anyway. The application was sparse. 11 years at Everett Power Solutions, lid technician, multiple commendations for safety protocols and emergency repairs. Then a 1-year gap labeled family medical leave. After that, a string of short-term contracts, night shifts at warehouses, delivery driving. No gaps longer than 2 weeks. No complaints. Just steady, quiet persistence. At the bottom, a handwritten note attached to the warehouse application. I'm applying because Carson Tech offers comprehensive family coverage after 90 days. My daughter has asthma and needs regular checkups. I am reliable, strong, and willing to work any shift. Thank you for considering me. Rachel closed the folder. She stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the city. Seattle sprawled below ferries, cutting across the sound traffic crawling along I-5. Somewhere down there, a 7-year-old girl was waiting for her father to come home with cake. She thought of the meeting 2 weeks earlier. The conference room had been the same one, the agenda quarterly cost review, line item 17 reduction of 43 positions across operations. Rachel had approved it without hesitation. Redundancies, she had said, were optimizing for efficiency. One name on the list had belonged to a single father in logistics. He had requested flexible hours 3 times in 6 months each time because his daughter's asthma had flared. The requests were denied. The termination was approved. Rachel remembered her exact words to the HR director: "Personal circumstances cannot override performance metrics. If we make exceptions, the system collapses." Now those words echoed back at her colder than she remembered. She returned to her office, a corner suite with panoramic views and minimalist furniture. She sat behind her desk and pulled up the internal employee database. Typed Ethan Marsh. Nothing came up. He hadn't been hired yet. She switched to archived applications and found his file again. She read every line. The medical leave documentation included hospital discharge summaries for his wife. Pancreatic cancer, 14 months. The final note from the oncologist patient passed peacefully at home, surrounded by family. There were emails from Ethan to his former supervisor after the layoff, polite requests for references, offers to return part-time. No replies in the chain. She closed the laptop. For the first time in years, Rachel felt something shift inside her chest. Not guilt exactly, but recognition. She had built Carson Tech into a powerhouse by demanding excellence without exception. She had told herself it was necessary. Survival in tech required ruthlessness, but Ethan Marsh had survived something far harder without ever raising his voice. Her assistant knocked softly. "Ms. Whitmore. Your 9:30 with the board is in 5. Cancel it," Rachel said. The assistant blinked. "Ma'am, reschedule. Tell them something urgent came up." She grabbed her coat and left the office. Outside, the sky had darkened to slate gray. Rain threatened but held back. Rachel walked 3 blocks to a small cafe she rarely visited. She ordered black coffee and sat at a corner table watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. She thought about her own mother. 15 years ago, almost to the day, Rachel had stood beside a hospital bed in Portland. Her mother, frail after years of chemotherapy, had gripped her hand with surprising strength. "You're going to be brilliant, Rachel. But don't forget to live." Rachel had smiled, kissed her forehead, and flown back to Seattle the same night for a closing deal. Her mother died 2 days later. Rachel had been in a boardroom when the call came. She had not cried at the funeral. She had returned to work the next Monday. Now sitting in the cafe with cooling coffee, she wondered when she had stopped listening to anyone who wasn't in a position to advance her agenda. Her phone buzzed a notification from the HR system. Ethan Marsh's warehouse interview had just concluded. Recommendation hire pending background check. Rachel stared at the screen. Then she opened a new email. To HR Director Subject Ethan Marsh. Warehouse application. Please expedite background check and prepare offer letter, full benefits from day 1, schedule orientation for next Monday. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Back at the apartment in Ballard, Ethan unlocked the door at 5:47 p.m. Grace was already in the living room, crayons scattered across the coffee table. "Daddy." She ran to him, arms wide. He scooped her up, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and crayons. "Hey, birthday girl. How was school? Good Mrs. Larson made cupcakes, but I saved mine for you." He set her down and pulled the small box from the paper bag, a single-layer chocolate cake from the grocery store bakery, the kind with too much frosting and a plastic happy birthday ring on top. Grace's eyes lit up. "Is it time almost? Let's light the candle first." They sat on the floor. Ethan struck a match, lit the single candle. Grace squeezed her eyes shut, made her wish, and blew. "What did you wish for?" he asked. She grinned. "Can't tell. It won't come true." He cut 2 slices. They ate in comfortable silence, frosting on their noses. Later, after bath and story time, Grace fell asleep, clutching the plastic ring like treasure. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He opened the message. "Mr. Marsh, this is Rachel Whitmore. I kept your daughter's birthday in mind today. I hope she enjoyed her cake. I've reviewed your file more carefully. There may be a better fit for your skills in our technical operations department. Please come to the 39th floor Monday at 9 a.m. We'll discuss details then. No promises, just a conversation." Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. He looked back at Grace, sleeping peacefully. Then he typed one word in reply: "Thank you." He set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a while, wondering what had just shifted in the universe and whether he was ready for whatever came next. The rain held off until Saturday afternoon, then came down in soft, steady sheets that turned the sidewalks of Ballard into dark mirrors. Rachel Whitmore parked her black Audi 2 blocks from the community playground on 17th Avenue Northwest, far enough that no one would notice her. She pulled on a gray trench coat over jeans and a simple white sweater, no blazer, no heels, no power accessories. Sunglasses, even though the sky was the color of wet concrete. She walked the rest of the way with her hands in her pockets, head slightly bowed against the drizzle. The playground was small but well-kept rubberized surface. Bright yellow slides, a cluster of swings, a wooden climbing structure shaped like a pirate ship. A handful of families dotted the benches. Rachel found a spot under a dripping cedar tree half hidden by the trunk and watched. Ethan Marsh sat on a green metal bench near the swings. He wore the same faded blue shirt from the interview sleeves, rolled up a paper cup of coffee steaming in his hand. Grace was on the slide climbing the ladder with determined little steps, her pink rain boots flashing against the wet metal. Her dark curls were frizzing in the damp air, and she laughed every time she reached the top and slid down with arms outstretched. Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent the week reviewing files, Ethan's, yes, but also others. Single parents who had requested accommodations. Some had been granted, most had not. She had signed off on denials she barely remembered reading. Now each one felt like a small, deliberate cut. Grace reached the bottom of the slide, spun around, and ran back to Ethan. She held a piece of paper rain-spotted but carefully folded. Daddy Look Ethan set the coffee down and took the drawing. Even from 30 yards away, Rachel could see the bold crayon lines, a tall stick figure in blue with a red cape holding hands, with a smaller figure in pink. Beside them, a robot dog with antennae and a wagging tail. "That's me," his Iron Man Ethan asked voice carrying on the damp air. "Uh-huh, because you always save me. And this is the robot puppy I want. It can bark and fetch and never gets tired." Ethan laughed softly, the sound low and warm. "You made my cape look pretty cool," Grace beamed. "Because you're the best, Daddy." She climbed onto the bench beside him, leaned against his shoulder, and pointed at the drawing. "See, we're a team." Rachel's throat closed. She pressed her back against the tree trunk, the rough bark biting through her coat. She remembered her mother's hospital room in Portland. The beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the thin hand clutching hers. "You're going to change the world," Rachel, her mother, had whispered. "Just don't forget the people in it." Rachel had nodded, kissed her forehead, and left for the airport that same evening. A merger was closing in San Francisco. Deadlines didn't wait for grief. 15 years later, she still hadn't learned how to stay. Grace hopped off the bench and ran toward the climbing structure. Halfway there, she stopped, turned, and spotted Rachel under the tree. For a moment, their eyes met. Grace tilted her head curious, then waved with the drawing still in her hand. Rachel froze. Grace hesitated, then trotted over raindrops catching in her lashes. "Hi," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Do you like robot puppies?" Rachel blinked. Up close, Grace's eyes were wide and brown, the same shade as Ethan's. There was no fear in them, only bright interest. I've never had a pet," Rachel said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, soft, uncertain. Grace shrugged as if that were no big deal. "That's okay. Robot ones don't need food or walks. They just need batteries." "And friends." Rachel managed a small smile. "That sounds practical." Grace held out the drawing. "You can have this one. I can make another for Daddy." Rachel hesitated, then took the paper. The crayon lines were bold, unhesitant. The robot puppy had a big smile and hearts around its tail. "Thank you," Rachel said. The words felt foreign. Grace nodded solemnly. "You're welcome. Bye." She ran back to the climbing structure, calling over her shoulder, "Daddy." "The lady likes robot puppies." Ethan looked up. His gaze found Rachel. For a second, their eyes locked across the playground. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just acknowledged her presence with a small nod, then turned back to watch Grace. Rachel folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. She stayed under the tree until the rain thickened and families began to pack up. When Ethan finally stood, took Grace's hand, and walked toward the parking lot, Rachel waited until they were out of sight. She returned to her car, sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, and pulled the drawing out again. The stick figure Ethan wore a red cape and carried a toolbox. Grace had drawn herself holding his other hand. The robot puppy danced between them. Rachel traced the lines with her fingertip. That evening, the top floor of Carson Tech Tower was dark except for the light in her office. She sat at her desk, the city glittering far below. The drawing lay flat under the desk lamp. She opened her phone and found the text thread with Ethan. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for nearly a minute. Finally, she typed, "Mr. Marsh, I still have Grace's drawing. It's on my desk. I think I owe both of you a thank you. Not just for the art, but for reminding me of something I'd forgotten. If you're still open to a conversation on Monday, I'd like to discuss a different role, one that matches your experience. No pressure, just an offer to talk. Rachel Whitmore." She read it twice, then hit send. The message whooshed away into the night. Rachel leaned back in her chair, eyes on the drawing. The robot puppy's smile seemed wider under the lamp. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Somewhere in Ballard, a 7-year-old girl was probably asleep with a plastic birthday ring on her nightstand, dreaming of robot puppies and superheroes who always came home. And in the quiet office tower, a woman who had spent 15 years running from everything that couldn't be measured began for the first time in a long time to sit still. Monday morning arrived under a sky scrubbed clean by the weekend rain. Carson Tech Tower gleamed in the pale sunlight, its glass panels reflecting the sharp blue of early October. The 39th floor conference room was already filling when Rachel Whitmore stepped through the double doors at 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes late. No one commented. No one dared. The long mahogany table was occupied by the usual suspects division heads, the CFO, the VP of operations, the HR director, and a handful of senior managers. Laptops were open coffee cups, steaming slides queued on the massive screen at the front. The agenda read, Quarterly Performance Review Q3 Metrics and Q4 Projections. Numbers charts, red and green arrows, familiar territory. Rachel did not sit at the head of the table. She remained standing just inside the doorway, coat still on hands in her pockets. "Good morning," she said. A murmur of replies. Eyes flicked to her, then to watches. 2 minutes late was unprecedented. She walked to the front past the projector without touching the remote and faced the room. "Before we begin," she said, "I'm changing the agenda." Silence settled like dust after a dropped pin. She pulled a thin folder from her coat pocket, the same folder she had carried since Friday, and set it on the table. Beside it, she placed Grace's drawing, now carefully preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. The crayon lines looked almost defiant against the polished wood. "Today we're not starting with revenue," she continued. "We're starting with people." The CFO cleared his throat. "Rachel, the board will get their numbers," she said evenly. "But first, they're going to hear this." She opened the folder. Ethan Marsh, 38, former lead technician at Everett Power Solutions, 11 years of service, multiple safety commendations, took 1 year of unpaid family medical leave to care for his wife during terminal illness. Returned to find his position eliminated. Spent the last 3 years working whatever shifts he could find, warehouse, delivery night maintenance to keep a roof over his daughter's head, and insurance on her asthma medication. She paused, letting the words settle. Last week he applied for a warehouse associate role here. Third shift, $22.50 an hour plus benefits. That was the only reason he walked into this building. A few heads turned toward one another. The HR director shifted in his seat. He was routed to the executive suite by mistake, Rachel went on. A clerical error. He sat across from me in this very room carrying a paper lunch bag and told me the truth. He had no degree, no executive experience, no interest in a corner office. He just needed steady work and coverage for his 7-year-old daughter. She looked around the table. I listened. Then I let him walk out. Quiet. "I've spent the last week reading files," she said. "Not just his, yours too. Requests for flexible hours, leaves for sick children, accommodations for single parents. Most were denied, some were never answered. I signed off on many of them myself." The VP of operations leaned forward. "Rachel, with respect, those decisions were data-driven." Exceptions erode productivity. Productivity, Rachel repeated. She placed both hands flat on the table. We measure output in dollars and hours. We track utilization rates, absenteeism percentages, performance scores. But we never ask the simplest question, what are we optimizing for? She lifted the drawing from the sleeve and held it up so everyone could see. This is what Grace Marsh drew of her father. He's wearing a red cape. He's holding her hand. There's a robot puppy, because she wants one. She calls him Iron Man, not because he's rich or powerful, but because he always shows up. She set the drawing down gently. I've spent 15 years building this company on the belief that ruthlessness equals strength. Cut costs, eliminate redundancies, demand more. I told myself it was necessary. Survival in this industry demands it. She looked directly at the HR director. But last week I met a man who survived something far harder without ever raising his voice or asking for special treatment. He didn't demand flexibility. He begged for the chance to work any hours necessary so his daughter could breathe easier. The room was utterly still. If a company cannot make space for people like Ethan Marsh, Rachel said, then I no longer want to lead it. She straightened. Effective immediately, Ethan Marsh will be offered a position in technical operations lead technician maintenance and reliability. Base salary commensurate with his experience. Full benefits from day one. Flexible scheduling to accommodate his daughter's needs. The CFO opened his mouth. Rachel raised a hand. I will handle the board. If there are objections to this decision, they can be directed to me. She looked around the table once more. We will also conduct a full review of our family leave and accommodation policies. No more automatic denials. No more silence on request. We will treat people as though their lives outside these walls matter, because they do. She picked up the drawing and the folder. That's all for now. The rest of the agenda can wait until tomorrow. She walked toward the door. Halfway there, she paused and turned back. One more thing, she said. If anyone in this room believes that caring for a child makes someone less valuable to this company, then perhaps the misalignment is not with our policies. It's with our values. The door closed behind her. Outside in the corridor, Ethan stood near the reception desk, Grace beside him on a small bench. She was coloring in a new sketch pad, tongue between her teeth in concentration. Ethan held a paper cup of water he'd gotten from the break room. He looked up when Rachel emerged. She walked straight to them. Grace glanced up first. Hi. You came back. Rachel crouched to Grace's level. I did, and I'm sorry it took me so long to listen properly. Grace tilted her head. That's okay. Grown-ups learn slow sometimes. Rachel smiled. Small reel. You're right. She stood and faced Ethan. I've made a decision, she said. There's a role in technical operations. Lead technician. Your experience fits. Flexible hours. Benefits start immediately. The offer letter is being prepared now. Ethan exhaled slowly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, Rachel replied. Just know this, you won't be fighting alone anymore. Not here. Grace tugged Ethan's sleeve. Daddy, does this mean we get robot puppy money? Ethan laughed a short surprise sound. Maybe kiddo. Rachel looked at the two of them, father and daughter, paper cup and crayons, ordinary and unbreakable. I'll have HR contact you this afternoon, she said. Take the rest of the day. Spend it with Grace. Ethan met her eyes. Thank you. Rachel nodded once, then turned and walked toward the elevators. Behind her, Grace's voice carried softly down the hall. Daddy, she's nice. Can she come to my next birthday? Ethan's answer was quiet, but Rachel heard it anyway. We'll see, sweetheart. We'll see. 1 week later, the changes at Carson Tech Tower were subtle but unmistakable. On the third floor, where the break room had once been a sterile space of vending machines and fluorescent lights, a small corner had been transformed. A low table with colorful chairs, a bin of crayons and construction paper, a shelf of board books, and a few stuffed animals. A sign on the door read, Quiet Play Area for Children of Employees. During emergencies or short meetings. It wasn't large, but it was there. parents could drop off a child for 30 minutes without guilt. No one had complained about the cost. No one had asked for metrics to justify it. The new flexible scheduling policy rolled out quietly. Requests for adjusted hours, school drop-offs, doctor appointments, sick days were now flagged for review rather than automatic denial. A pilot program in operations allowed parents to shift core hours by 2 hours without formal approval. Productivity reports showed no drop in output. If anything, absenteeism dipped slightly. Ethan Marsh started on Monday. He wore a fresh navy work shirt with the Carson Tech logo stitched on the pocket khaki pants, still creased from the iron, and the same gray sneakers. His badge read Ethan Marsh, lead technician reliability and maintenance. He reported to the operations floor at 7:45 a.m., reviewed the day's preventive maintenance schedule, and walked the plant with his new team. The work was familiar. Diagnosing equipment faults, calibrating sensors, training younger techs on safety protocols. By noon, he had already caught a minor vibration issue on a cooling tower pump that could have become a shutdown if ignored. He ate lunch at his desk in the small office he shared with 2 other leads, turkey on rye from the paper bag, same as always. At 3 p.m., he left early to pick Grace up from school. No one questioned it. His supervisor simply nodded when Ethan mentioned the after-school pickup. That Saturday morning, the sun finally broke through the persistent Seattle clouds. The community playground on 17th Avenue Northwest was crowded with families taking advantage of the dry weather. Grace ran ahead, pink boots splashing through shallow puddles left from the week's rain. She carried her sketch pad under one arm and a half-eaten strawberry ice cream cone in the other hand. Ethan followed at a slower pace, hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his face. Beside him walked Rachel Whitmore. She wore jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and sneakers. No trench coat. No sunglasses. Her hair was down, catching the light in soft waves. She carried a small paper bag from the corner bakery, fresh cinnamon rolls for later. They found a bench near the swings. Grace immediately ran to the climbing structure, calling back, "Watch me, Daddy. Watch me, Ms. Rachel." Rachel sat legs crossed at the ankles. She's fearless. She gets that from her mom, Ethan said quietly. Me. I'm the one who worries. They watched Grace climb, slide laugh. The playground noise wrapped around them, shout, squeals, the rhythmic creak of chains on swings. Rachel spoke first. "How's the new role?" "Good," Ethan said. "Better than good. The team's solid. The work matters. And I get to be home for dinner most nights?" She nodded. "I'm glad." A pause. "I read the policy changes," Ethan continued. "The play area, the flexibility. People are talking about it, not just in operations, in every department." Rachel looked down at her hands. "It's a start. Not enough, but a start." Ethan glanced at her. "You didn't have to do any of it." "I did," she said simply. "I just didn't know it until I met you and Grace." Grace ran back, cheeks flushed, ice cream smeared on her chin. She climbed onto the bench between them. "Daddy, Ms. Rachel, look, I made a new drawing." She opened the sketch pad. This time 3 stick figures, one tall in blue with a red cape, one small in pink, one in gray with long hair, all holding hands. A robot puppy sat at their feet, tail wagging. "That's us," Grace announced proudly. "A team." Rachel stared at the page. Her throat tightened. Ethan cleared his throat. "It's really good, kiddo." Grace looked up at Rachel. "You can keep this one, too. I made extras." Rachel took the drawing carefully. "Thank you, Grace. I'll put it on my desk, right next to the first one." Grace grinned, then hopped down and ran back to the swings. Ethan watched her go, then turned to Rachel. "She likes you," he said. Rachel smiled faintly. "She's easy to like." Another pause. The playground sounds filled the space between them. Ethan spoke quietly. "I don't know what comes next. I'm grateful for the job, for the chance. But I'm not looking for anything more than that right now." Rachel nodded. "I understand." She looked at Grace swinging higher and higher, laughing into the wind. "But if it's all right," she said, "I'd like to be friends. Just friends. No expectations. No rush. Just people who show up when it matters." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I think that's the best thing anyone's offered me in a long time." They sat in companionable silence, watching Grace play. Later, when the sun dipped lower and Grace started to yawn, they walked back toward the parking lot together. Grace held Ethan's hand on one side, Rachel's on the other. At the car, Grace hugged Rachel's legs. "Bye, Ms. Rachel." "Come to my next birthday," Rachel crouched down. "I'd like that very much," Grace beamed, then climbed into the back seat. Ethan looked at Rachel over the roof of the car. "Thank you," he said again. "For everything." Rachel met his eyes. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." She watched them drive away, Ethan's hand waving from the window, Grace's face pressed to the glass. Back in her office that evening, Rachel opened the top drawer of her desk. She placed the new drawing beside the first one. Under the lamp, the three figures looked almost alive. She opened her laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began typing a short memo to the board. Subject: proposed permanent policy updates, family support, and flexibility. She wrote for nearly an hour. When she finished, she attached the two drawings, scanned and anonymized, and hit send. Then she closed the laptop, opened the window, and let the cool night air rush in. Somewhere in Ballard, a 7-year-old girl was probably asleep with crayons still scattered on her bed, dreaming of robot puppies and teams that always held hands. And in the quiet tower, a woman who had once measured success in dollars and titles looked at the drawings on her desk and felt for the first time in years that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because everything was perfect, not because the world had changed overnight, but because someone had finally listened. And because kindness, quiet, steady, unglamorous kindness, had never been a weakness after all. It had always been the strongest thing there was,